Kai sat curled in the corner of the bed, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees, a quiet sentinel whose only weapon was observation. Her eyes, large and still hazy with sleep, followed the scene before her with a focus that needed no sound and no words. Her mother lay nestled against Fred, her cheek resting upon his chest, while his arm, heavy and calm, draped over her like a silent vow, as an unspoken promise felt more deeply than it could ever be said. For Kai, who had never known the world of sound, silence was as natural as breath, but even she could sense that this silence was different. There was warmth in it, something alive and tender, something that reached beyond what sight alone could understand. She breathed slowly, quietly, as if she too were becoming part of that stillness, and she didn't wish to disturb it with even a single unnecessary movement. Carefully, she lowered her feet to the floor, mindful not to let the mattress tremble behind her. Her fingers found yesterday's clothes, a faded jersey and a pair of shorts that hung a little too loose on her thin frame. She pulled on her socks, slipped into her sneakers, and ran her hand through her tousled blonde hair, smoothing it in a clumsy gesture born more of habit than need. Yet before leaving the room, her gaze returned to what she was leaving behind. Her mother and Fred, wrapped in the quiet they shared, the peace of adults who, in sleep, had become each other's refuge. Kai did not understand the nature of that closeness, but she could feel it, like a sun ray that extended softly toward her, warm and protective. Even without a voice, even without a sound, she knew something had changed. Perhaps this was their world, but somehow she had become a part of it too. She closed the door behind her with careful hands. Down the hallway she moved slowly and cautiously, as though afraid to disturb the fragile calm of a morning just beginning. When she saw the door with frosted glass, she knew she had found the bathroom and reached out to grasp the handle, just as the door opened from the inside. She froze, startled. Before her stood the woman she had met for the first time only yesterday, and yet somehow it felt as if she had known her all her life. Delara's frame was slight, but there was an unmistakable dignity in her bearing. Her face, bathed in the soft light of morning, was full of gentleness and warmth. There was no need for words. There couldn't have been, but none were necessary. Instead, Delara's smile, quiet and unassuming, spoke with a completeness no sentence could match. Slowly, with great care, she reached out and brushed her hand across Kai's cheek, as if to convey through that single touch everything that language could never hold, to affirm a bond that knew neither distance, nor time, nor barrier. For a heartbeat, Kai forgot to breathe, disarmed by the tenderness of the gesture. She looked into the woman's face and saw something achingly familiar, the same features her mother bore, the same light, the same quiet strength. And in that one moment of shared stillness, the silence was no longer empty. It was full of meaning and full of connection. It became a space in which they recognized one another, and in which both, without a single word, understood that they belonged. Fred's voice was hoarse and low, colored by that tender uncertainty of someone afraid to disturb the fragile peace still resting in the room. "You were so brave yesterday, Anya," he whispered, his hand gently brushing a loose strand of her hair away from her cheek. In his eyes there was nothing but admiration and the quiet relief of a man who had almost lost what he held now. Anya, with her eyes still closed, smiled faintly, the quiet kind of smile born of safety and quiet self-assurance. "Of course I was," she murmured, her tone sounding more like a memory than a statement. "I'm Anya Woodberg, aren't I?" His laugh was soft and subdued, the kind of sound that didn't dare pierce the morning calm. "Well, with logic like that, it's hard to argue. When logic shines as brightly as mine," she replied, tracing the line of his arm with her fingertip, slow, absent-minded, tender. "There's no point in trying." He watched her as she spoke, her words drifting lazily from her lips, half playful, half sincere, and realized that even in her nonsense he found solace. "Sometimes you say things that make absolutely no sense, Miss Woodberg," he said, and though there was amusement in his voice, there was even more affection. "Isn't that what you love about me?" she asked, her voice soft but teasing. "Well, one of many things," he murmured. And as he spoke, he leaned closer, pausing only for a moment, as if asking for permission to cross a line long ago erased. She answered him with a quiet, trusting smile, and in the next breath, their lips met. The kiss was neither hurried nor fevered. It was still, deliberate, full of meaning. The kind of kiss that makes the world stop, if only for a heartbeat. But the world did not stop. The door opened. Kai stood there, her braids bouncing lightly against her shoulders, a wide, sunlit smile spreading across her small face. Behind her was Dilara, calm, serene, and smiling. And in that instant, the fragile peace in the room shattered like glass. Fred and Anya pulled apart, exchanging glances heavy with unspoken explanations and apologies that didn't need to exist, but still lingered in the air. Kai froze, surprised but not frightened, her eyes wide with the innocent curiosity of a child seeing a piece of a puzzle she didn't yet understand. Dilara rested her hands on the girl's shoulders and said warmly, with a teasing lilt, "Has someone lost their daughter this morning?" Anya's gaze darted to the clock, and a flicker of alarm crossed her face when she saw it was already past 10. She leaned toward Kai, her expression softening into that tender worry reserved only for her child. Her hands moved swiftly as she signed, "Did you break something?" Kai shook her head, her eyes shining with a brightness that needed no sound. "Did you get into trouble?" Anya asked again, but this time Kai's only answer was laughter, pure, crystalline laughter that needed no voice to be understood. "Then what did you do, my love?" Kai pointed at Dilara, her hands moving quickly, her face alive with excitement. "She brushed my hair and took me to the dining room. We had breakfast together. I had a burrito, Mama. It was really, really good. I shared it with the princess girl. She was so pretty. We played Uno and laughed a lot. She gave me a gift of friendship." Overcome with relief, Anya sank back against the pillow, her smile light and effortless, her heart suddenly free of weight. "That's wonderful, Kai," she signed, her gestures carrying gratitude for the joy her daughter had found in a world that had once denied her so much. Kai lifted her arm proudly, showing an ink bracelet gleaming on her wrist, cheap, plastic, but drenched in meaning only a child could understand. It was a symbol of friendship, of trust, of that small, unspoken loyalty that somehow keeps the world from falling apart. "It's not fair that you two have your own secret language," Dilara said with a smile, as Fred joined her side, trying to disguise his emotion behind a feigned lightness. Anya translated Kai's message, explaining that Scarlett had given her the bracelet and that they had spent the morning playing and laughing together. Dilara nodded, watching them. "Scarlett rarely plays with anyone," she said softly. "But with Kai, she doesn't need words. I'm impressed. She's special. Anya, Fred, your daughter is extraordinary." Fred paused then, struck silent. The words seemed too small, too ordinary to contain what he felt, because as he looked at Kai, there was something in his eyes that didn't belong to the present moment, a longing that reached beyond time itself. He looked at Anya, and before she could speak, she already answered with her gaze. Her lips moved barely, whispering, "She is." And then, in a voice threaded with gratitude, she added, "I'll never be able to thank you enough for letting us stay here, for letting us be with you, Mama." Kai climbed onto the bed then, kneeling between them, steadying their faces as though searching for answers to questions she hadn't yet learned to ask. Fred watched her, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might give him away. His eyes said what words never could. They pleaded for trust, for closeness, and for the chance to be allowed to belong. He reached out his arms toward her, quietly, hesitantly, offering everything he had. Kai froze for a heartbeat, her small body tense, but then she relaxed and crawled across the blanket, surrendering herself into his embrace. Her little arms wrapped around him, at first uncertain, as if she were touching a dream, then tighter, steadier, until she melted fully against him. Fred held her gently, as though cradling something fragile enough to vanish if he breathed too hard. And in that moment, she didn't pull away. In that moment, he knew he needed nothing else. The world fell away, time lost its shape, and all that remained was the quiet truth he had never been able to say aloud. Anya watched them, her eyes glistening, not with sorrow or joy, but with that rare kind of gratitude that appears when life, if only for an instant, returns something it once took away. She reached out and softly brushed her fingers through Kai's braids, wanting to seal the moment, to carve it into memory. She had imagined this countless times, in dreams and in silent wishes whispered to the dark, but none of those dreams came close to what she saw now. How many nights had she pictured this impossible image, her daughter in the arms of the man she loved, connected by something deeper than words or reason? How many times had she listened, in her imagination, to the quiet between them, recognizing in it all that life had once denied her? And now, as that vision took real shape before her eyes, Anya sat still, overwhelmed by the impossible tenderness of it all. Her little girl and her father, in the same room, breathing the same air. Dilara remained for a moment longer at the doorway, watching them with the quiet understanding of someone who knows when silence is sacred. There was no question in her eyes, no trace of curiosity, only a gentle recognition of the holiness of what unfolded before her. Her gaze softened, filled with warmth and a kind of reverence for what she witnessed. Then, as though afraid her presence might disturb the fragile, newly born closeness between them, she lowered her eyes, whispered a soft excuse, and quietly withdrew, closing the door behind her. In that retreat, there was tenderness, a silent act of protection, preserving the moment for the three of them, knowing it belonged only to them. Kai was still sitting in Fred's lap, nestled into his thighs, her small hands resting against his chest as if trying to catch and memorize the rhythm of that heart, which, until yesterday, had been completely foreign to her. Her fingers, hesitant and unaware, began to move across his shirt until the soft pads of her fingertips brushed against something hard and unnatural, something that didn't belong to the body beneath. She froze, her bright face darkening, and her eyes took on a seriousness that did not suit a child. She straightened, confusion flickering across her expression, and without a word, began to lift the fabric, guided by an innocent yet relentless need to understand. Fred closed his eyes for a moment, and Anya held her breath, yet neither of them tried to stop her. They both knew, without needing to say it, that this moment belonged to her, and to her alone. When the fabric finally gave way, revealing the bandages, white, tightly wrapped around his stomach and chest, Kai trembled, her breath caught, as though a cold wind had swept through her. She stared at those silent witnesses of a struggle she could not fully understand, yet recognized instinctively, through the scent of hospitals, the chill of sterile walls, and the heaviness of that day she still carried deep within herself. Her small hands let go of the hem abruptly and pulled the fabric back down, almost in panic, as if trying to hide what she had seen, not only from herself, but from the entire world. Her gaze fell to the floor, her brows knitted in a mute question, and Fred cupped her cheeks in his palms, gently lifting her face just enough for their eyes to meet. In his eyes, there was something words could never hold, but also a silent confession that the past could never be erased. "I'm all right," he whispered, his voice soft, almost fragile, filled with a plea for her to understand, to believe him, even without a sign. Yet Kai sighed nothing in return. Instead, she pressed herself against him, seeking reassurance in the beat of his heart, in the warmth that touched her cheek as she leaned against his chest. Fred closed his eyes and tenderly, almost imperceptibly, brushed his lips against her hair. "Good morning, my little monkey," he murmured with a smile that carried both pain and joy. For him, that moment was nothing short of a miracle. The fact that she allowed him to hold her, that she stayed in his lap, that she hadn't pushed him away, it was more than he had ever hoped to receive from her. In that silence, in that fragile trust, his lap had become a home she had long believed she didn't deserve. She wanted to bury herself in that moment and never let it go. Little Kai was already a girl who went to school, who would one day have secrets, friends, and quiet joys she would not share with him. The day would come when his embrace would become too small for her, when she would slip away from him, step by step, pushed forward by a life from which he had been absent for too long. He thought of all the firsts he had missed, her birth, her first cry, the laughter he had never properly heard, the tiny footsteps that had never echoed through his home. He hadn't been there to wipe away her tears, to guard her dreams, to catch her when she fell. And now, as he held her, his body burned with the bitter realization that he didn't even know the date his daughter came into the world. That unknown day hurt more than the wounds beneath his bandages, more than every blow he had ever endured. And so he wanted to hold her, to learn sign language, to tease her, to draw laughter from her eyes, to call her by all the silly names that came without thought, but from a heart brimming with tenderness. He wanted to be her father in every moment, because fate had already taken too much from him. Kai pressed even closer to him, her small hand reaching for his, gripping his fingers tightly, firmly, as if to show him she was holding on, that she wasn't letting go. In that gesture, in that silence filled with morning light, the room from Anya's childhood became a world of its own, closed and safe, where the past softened into the present and love wrote its pages without needing sound. Fred's hand moved gently across her back, watching how the small shape of her body seemed to disappear within his embrace, while Anya, leaning against the headboard, reached out and ran her fingers through his hair. She touched him quietly, intimately, with a love that no longer needed to hide. Her fingers trailed down his temple, and then her lips found his shoulder, pressing a kiss that was soft, silent, yet full of meaning, as an answer to the past, an acknowledgement of the present, and a promise of what was still to come. Their little family might never appear perfect in the eyes of the world, but here, in this room, for the first time after years of wandering in silence, they were whole, and they were theirs. Fred pulled both Anya and Kai close, with a quiet devotion that asked for nothing in return. He kissed Anya's temple and rested his forehead against her hair. Kai had gone still in his arms, peaceful and safe, a child who had found her place. And so they remained, bound together, motionless, silent. Fred, Anya, and their Kai. Breakfast had always held a special meaning for Fred, though he had always despised getting up early. In time, he had learned to recognize in those hours the quiet gifts of the day, the precious moments when the world had not yet begun to roar with demands and pressures, when it still breathed slower, gentler, allowing a man to catch his breath before the day swallowed him whole. The scent of freshly brewed coffee, the comforting warmth of toasted bread, and the calm at the table seemed to him like the one steady point in the spinning of his days. And nothing made him happier than sharing those moments with the people he truly cared for. It was, in a way, a ritual of belonging, a place where, if only for a short while, they could set aside everything waiting for them beyond the door and anchor themselves in each other, like ships seeking a safe harbor. He felt a special joy on those rare mornings when Matilda didn't have to go to school, because then time belonged to the two of them, to his favorite little creature, whose gaze alone could remind him of every reason it was worth waking up for and fighting another day. And now, as he sat at the table surrounded by people who had begun to occupy more and more space in his heart, he felt a new kind of peace, strange and fragile, yet so precious that he believed he could live on it alone. The people he had once pushed away or viewed as distant were now becoming the very axis of his world. In that circle, Anya held a place unlike any other. She was everything to him, his best friend, his lover, the mother of his child, and the woman he loved with a force that sometimes frightened him, because he hadn't known he was capable of finding that depth within himself. From the very first moment they met, he had seen in her everything he had been searching for, even without realizing it. Their connection had begun as a game, innocent teasing and small flirtations during rehearsals, but soon turned into a current that could not be stopped. They became more to each other than they had ever planned to be, more than life at that moment seemed willing to allow. And together, they had gone through extremes, from elation to sorrow, from passion to loss. Yet he had never regretted it. Not a single wrong step, not a single night when he missed her so much his heart ached with silent longing. The Livingstons hadn't come down to breakfast, but Fred and Anya hardly noticed. For them, time had stilled in the quiet intimacy of that shared meal, while Dilara sat with them, calm and unassuming, her joy barely hidden as she looked at her younger daughter. Once again, at her table, alongside a man who had quietly slipped into their lives and become a part of them. To her, this was a scene she had long wished to see, no matter how much her own past still ached. "Mom," Anya said softly, lifting her glass of orange juice, "could you give me the keys to Grandma and Grandpa's house?" Her words fell across the table like something heavy yet tender. A small stone dropped into still water, sending ripples that spread wider and wider. Dilara watched her for a moment, as though searching her eyes for something that would explain the sudden request, then asked gently, "You want to go there?" Anya nodded, a faint smile curving her lips, one that carried more sorrow than joy. "It hasn't been opened in years," Dilara said, her voice tinged with quiet melancholy. "It's probably full of dust and stale air. It will need light and fresh air again." "I know," Anya replied, lowering her gaze to the table, as if afraid she might find in her mother's eyes a question she couldn't answer. "But I want to see it. I miss it. And now that Dad left me that house, I feel responsible for it, as if he entrusted me with a piece of his silence. I want to take care of it, and I want to show it to Kai. I want her to see where I grew up." Dilara reached across the table and wrapped her daughter's hand in hers, squeezing it with the tenderness of a mother who understands the weight behind every spoken and unspoken word. Her eyes glistened with a soft shimmer, but her expression remained steady. "You can't imagine how happy I am that the house is yours now," she said quietly. "It always should have been. You can go there whenever you wish. No one can ever take that from you." "Thank you, Mom," Anya murmured, pressing her lips to her mother's hands, kissing them like a child seeking comfort and reassurance. Dilara rose then, with the dignified calm that age had gifted her, and disappeared down the hallway to fetch the keys. Anya watched her go, until she vanished from sight, then felt the warmth of a hand sliding down her arm. Fred had laced his fingers with hers, holding her with a tenderness and certainty she needed more than anything in that moment. "Are you all right, Fred?" she asked quietly, meeting his gaze. He nodded and kissed her wrist, breathing her in as if her scent alone could steady him. "I am. And you?" "I'll be fine. I have you." Fred closed his eyes for a moment, letting those words sink into him as though they were a prayer. "Thank you for letting me back into your life, Anya." She touched his cheek with her fingers, feeling the roughness of his unshaven skin. "I was thinking about Matilda." "So was I," he whispered. "Would you like to bring her next time? She could play with Kai and meet Scarlett and Saskia." Fred hesitated, thoughtful. Would your mom and sister be all right with that? I don't want to cause more tension. We'll tell Mom soon, Anya said. And as for Elizabeth, I don't really care. I know she hates me, and she has every right to. I've earned that. She can't even look at my child. But at least she doesn't stop Scarlett and Saskia from playing with her. And Matilda. I'd like her to be part of this. You're extraordinary, Anya, Fred said, pulling her closer. Your soul, it's so gentle, so rare, like it doesn't belong to this world. Thank you for opening it to me. Why wouldn't I? She whispered. I love everything that's yours. And Tilly's part of you. His lips found hers then, soft, quiet, like a prayer, and his hands slid through her hair, holding her gently. They broke apart only when the sound of footsteps and heels echoed in the hallway. Fred drew back, hiding a smile, just as Dilara returned with a small silver key resting in her palm. She stopped beside Anya and handed it to her with care, as though passing down a piece of her own past. This is yours, darling. It always has been. Anya stood and wrapped her in a tight embrace. Thank you, Mama, truly. There's no need to thank me, Dilara replied, her voice warm. I always hoped Ryan would leave that house to you. I know how much you loved it. I still do, Anya whispered. And I miss it. It's time you went back, Dilara said, then added with a faint smile. Will you be taking Kai with you? Yes, Anya confirmed. She's outside, playing on the trampoline with Scarlett. You have no idea how happy it makes me that my granddaughters love each other. I don't ever want anyone to separate them, Anya said, her voice almost solemn. Neither do I, Dilara answered softly, then lowered her gaze, as though something unspoken had just passed through her. Anya squeezed her hand and smiled gently. It'll all be all right. Dilara nodded and let them go. Looks like it's going to rain, she said as she watched them leave. You should head out soon, but don't say I didn't warn you. The house is probably full of dust. Fred and Anya exchanged a quiet smile, fingers entwined, and disappeared from the dining room, while Dilara remained at the table, watching them with a stillness that was part sorrow, part relief. Her daughter had finally found her peace, however fleeting, and a man who held her as if the whole world fit within her. That was all she had ever wanted, for her children to be happy, to be spared the burden of loneliness that had shadowed her all her life. And now, as the maid cleared the plates and silence settled once more over the room, Dilara rose and made her way toward her office. Work was all she had left, the only barrier that could still keep her above the fire smoldering inside her, threatening to consume her completely. Anya walked slowly, even though the wind pressed insistently against her back, offering no mercy as it whipped her hair across her face, driving the strands straight into her eyes as if toying with her. Ahead of her, Fred moved with steady, confident steps, his gaze fixed on Kai, who was darting ahead along the narrow path between tall pines that loomed above them like guardians of the old estate. They were climbing a gentle incline, and it seemed to take neither strength nor breath from them, while Anya, quiet and lost in thought, lingered a step behind, as if she wanted to slow time itself, to absorb every moment more deeply. As they passed, she reached out and brushed her fingers against the rough bark of the pine tree, as though greeting an old friend after a long absence, with a whisper that didn't need to be heard. Fred carried a backpack slung over his shoulders, dressed only in a short-sleeved shirt and light trousers. Anya, caught by a flicker of disbelief that sliced through her thoughts, wondered how he wasn't cold. Though spring had already begun knocking at the door, the air was still too crisp for her to even consider shedding the layers that warmed her shoulders and arms. The mere thought of walking dressed as lightly as he did sent a shiver down her spine. But that moment, her thoughts were louder than the chill. She was thinking about seeing her grandparents' old house again, the place where her childhood years had seeped into the walls and the things left behind. Nostalgia rose within her like mercury in a thermometer, swelling until she felt she might burst from its overflow. She missed her grandmother and grandfather, their warmth, their tenderness, their presence that once made the house feel like the beating heart of the family. After her grandmother's death, nothing had looked or sounded the same, and when her grandfather followed not long after, the house had gone quiet, as if it had lost its breath. But now, as she walked that familiar path, Anya's heart flickered with a small, bright fire. For the first time she was returning here with her daughter, and that thought alone was a beacon. The day carried a particular weight, different from any that came before. Since morning, it had felt different in her chest, lighter, more alive. She had slept peacefully, curled beside Kai, feeling Fred's arm draped protectively around her waist, and that simple presence had wrapped her in the certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. She was home. Kai was happy and safe, and Anya herself stood at the threshold of her first real step into a life with Fred. The thought alone sent a tremor through her, a tremor born not of fear, but of emotions too strong to stay contained. She was happy with him, profoundly, unexpectedly happy, and that happiness demanded no explanation. And yet, memories lingered, sometimes sharper than ever, and they were always the shadows that never fully fade. Fred was the first to spot the back of the house and stopped, turning to wait for her. Anya's steps unconsciously quickened, her heart leaping at the sight of the familiar shape of home, though weathered, overgrown, and touched by time's quiet decay. Without hesitation, she ran forward, keys in hand, unlocking the door with an impatience she couldn't hide. In her mind, rooms began to unfold, one by one, images resurfacing as if she carried within her a map of the house she had never truly forgotten. As she stepped inside, her eyes swept over the space, covered in white sheets draped over old furniture. To the right was the kitchen, where her grandmother once baked cakes and tarts for her and Elizabeth's birthdays, and the memory alone brought a smile to her face. The dining room, joined to the kitchen, summoned images of long dinners at the big table because her grandmother never allowed crumbs in the other rooms. Anya smiled softly at the thought. The living room, all the way to the left, still seemed to echo with her grandfather's jokes and his clumsy dance steps as the gramophone quietly played Frank Sinatra. And down the hallway were the bedrooms, hers and Elizabeth's, opposite their grandparents', with a small bathroom and a closet between them. Her eyes traced the doors and walls, conjuring the ghosts of moments still trapped inside those walls, until they reached the backyard. There, she saw the familiar tree, still standing, wrapped in green moss, as though it too bore the scars of time. But then she noticed something that didn't belong to her memories. Her breath caught in a small, startled gasp as her eyes fell on a bush of violet flowers bursting from a crack in the concrete. Purple and green hues stood out against the lifeless surroundings, as though they had grown out of pure impossibility. She stood there, speechless, unable to understand how such beauty had found its way here. Stepping closer, she looked at them, as if their colors could reveal a secret she had never known. For a moment, she stood before the blossoms, then turned back toward the house, still dazed. Fred said nothing. He simply watched her, recognizing how her thoughts were flowing into a quiet river of memory. His gaze shifted to Kai, who was crouched down, carefully wiping dust off a porcelain rabbit figurine. He knelt beside her, gently tucking a few stray strands of hair behind her ear, and in that small, unspoken gesture, love was written clear as daylight. Her braids were messy, and when she smiled at him before returning to her exploration, the air around her seemed to hum with life. Behind her trailed silence, the past, and the tender pulse of a love just beginning to take shape. Anya's wandering eyes stopped suddenly when she felt something shift beneath her feet. She looked down, but all she could see was an old cherry-colored rug, thick and dusty. When she stepped on the same spot again, she heard a faint crackling sound and felt the floor dip ever so slightly. Fred noticed her puzzled expression and came closer, wrapping an arm gently around her waist. "You all right, Ani?" he asked softly. She smiled, half amused, half uncertain. "I'm fine. I just broke the floor." He chuckled, asking her to step aside so he could take a look. Lifting the rug, he revealed a cracked wooden board that resisted at first until he applied more strength and managed to pry it open. Beneath it lay a small box, buried under a thick layer of dust, hidden, it seemed, for decades. Fred stared in silence, then turned to Anya and offered her his hand. She knelt, carefully pulling the box out, feeling the worn fabric rasp beneath her fingers, heavy with years of stillness. It was tied with a thin piece of twine, as if someone had wanted to seal it forever, and the sight alone stirred a rush of curiosity and anticipation that made her chest tighten. But before they could open it, a loud crash echoed from outside. Kai screamed, and both their hearts clenched at once. Fred darted out the door, Anya right behind him. Their daughter was already trying to stand, her knees and palms scraped and bleeding. Fred lifted her into his arms immediately, and beneath his worry and fear, his gaze shone with infinite tenderness as he pulled tissues from his backpack and began to wipe her wounds carefully, delicately, as if touching the most fragile thing in the world. "Are you all right, Kai?" Fred asked softly, shaping the words carefully so she could read them from his lips. His voice was gentle, but his eyes betrayed the weight of his worry. The girl nodded, assuring him that she was fine, though her elbow was scraped and reddened, and the skin on her knee pulsed faintly with a shallow cut from which a few thin drops of blood trickled down. With a tenderness that left no room for doubt, Fred took out a tissue and gently cleaned her elbow first, then her knees. She remained remarkably calm for her age, did not flinch even when the wound on her knee stung under the pressure. Only when he pressed the tissue softly against that spot did he lift his gaze and meet hers. And in that quiet, fleeting moment, it was as if they were speaking without words. And just then, despite the pain and the awkward fall, Kai leaned toward him, wrapped her arms around his neck, and rested her chin on his shoulder with an innocent need for comfort and belonging. Fred felt his heart melt, not in a single instant, but like a slow wave of warmth spreading from within, dissolving every trace of uncertainty. He still held the crumpled tissue in his hand, stained with blood and dirt, but all he truly felt was her embrace, small yet strong, determined in that uniquely childlike way of loving. He cupped her cheeks in his palms, gentle and steady, urging her to look at him, and then he kissed her forehead with such tenderness that it seemed his heart might break apart. Her face lit up with a smile, pure, childlike, wide and unguarded, and for a moment, Fred felt he could live forever, just feeding on that smile. He pressed another kiss to her forehead, and her delighted little cry filled the air between them. He pulled her close again, holding her in a silence that said everything words could never reach. In that embrace, strong and quiet, lay everything he wanted to tell her and everything she needed to hear. His heart pounded harder than ever before, fast, fierce, dangerously close to pain, because he knew the moment had come, the one he had carried within him for years, hidden like a forbidden secret. He was ready to speak the truth, but fear crawled into his fingers and the nervous bite of his lower lip, not because he didn't want to, but because he wasn't sure if she would understand. Yet he couldn't stay silent any longer. He focused on her eyes, her face, the stillness between them, where his heart's words could finally live. He pointed to himself, forming the words carefully. I am. Then he gestured toward her, and the next word slipped out like a confession that set him free. Your dad. At that instant, it felt as though his whole body shattered and came together again, his heart tumbling from his chest to his stomach and back, his hands trembling with fear and hope. Kai looked at him, absorbing every word, every flicker in his eyes, every small movement of his mouth. She didn't respond right away, but her silence was not hesitation, but understanding, deep and wordless. Fred repeated himself, cupping her face again, as if he could press the truth into her forever, without doubt or delay. I am your dad, Kai. Your dad. Your dad. He said it like a prayer, over and over, as though invoking something sacred that would bind them for life. And then, in one quiet, powerful instant, she understood. Her arms tightened around him, her small body pressed against his, and silence became speech. She held him with fierce certainty. Her embrace was an answer, proof that she understood, that she believed, that she accepted him. Fred lifted her into his arms, and she wrapped her legs around his back, hiding her face in his shoulder. He knew then, without any doubt, that she had understood, that in her heart he had taken the place that had always belonged to him. For Kai, in his arms, something new took root, a feeling she didn't yet have a name for. Safety. A home that wasn't a place, but a presence, the smell of skin, the strength of an embrace, the gentleness that asked for nothing in return. Her knee ached, the wound stung, but all of it disappeared beneath the weight of the moment. Her small body, taught to be silent, to endure, had finally found refuge. When Fred, overcome by a love that could never be faked, kissed her forehead once more, she knew, in her clear childlike truth, that this man was her father, and how long she had waited for him. Fred, meanwhile, was overwhelmed by his own emotions, as though the whole world had collapsed into that single instant. The words he had hidden finally poured out of him, like a river that had been dammed for too long. He had carried them for too long, never daring to speak them aloud. But now they were free, and here, in her embrace, he found forgiveness for the father he couldn't be before, and permission to become everything he should be now. Her small arms around his neck, and her legs clasped around his back, weren't just a child's hug. It was trust. It was acceptance. It was a silent cry that said, stay. In that moment, brief and eternal, they found each other. And in their silence, both of them knew the truth that would never need words. Love does not have to be explained. Meanwhile, Anya had removed the sheet from an old wooden chair and sat down, holding the box Fred had found beneath the floor. Carefully, she untied the string and lifted the lid, her breath catching at the sight of yellowed envelopes stacked neatly inside, each one marked with dates reaching back to the 1940s, to the time of the Second World War. Her hands trembled as she sifted through them, and a few photographs slipped free, landing softly in her lap. She looked at the faces she recognized, young, tender faces of her grandparents. She couldn't believe how young they were, barely 20, perhaps, and yet in their smiles and gazes, she saw the same strength and warmth she remembered from their later years. As her fingers traced the worn edges of the photos, something long asleep inside her began to stir, something she could no longer ignore. Curiosity outweighed hesitation. Slowly, she pulled out one letter, a thin sheet of parchment that crackled under her fingers with age, the ink still faintly raised beneath her touch. She unfolded it with care, feeling a pang of guilt, as though intruding on something sacred, something perhaps never meant to be opened. But the need to understand, to reach into the story that had been buried for decades, was stronger than any restraint. Her eyes fell upon the lines written in an elegant, trembling hand, and as she began to read, something within her quivered, as if she had just opened a door to a time that had been locked away forever. Dear Mitchell, I am in love with you. Hopelessly, completely, and irreversibly, and every attempt to deny it has only ended in an even greater defeat. I don't know what to do with this feeling that devours me from within. Should I hate you for becoming my weakness, or should I hate myself for allowing something I never intended to consume me? The truth is, I didn't choose this. I didn't want it. I didn't seek it. Love came on its own, uninvited, unstoppable, and now I live with it, as with a wound that never heals. I have tried again and again to suffocate it, to turn it into something else, but every time I think I've succeeded, I discover it has only grown stronger. I love you, Mitchell. I love you to the point of pain, so deeply that I can no longer tell where love ends and hatred begins, for I love and despise you with the same fire, the same passion. Tell me, what should I do? How do I explain to myself that what I feel isn't a sin, when deep down I know that it is? You can't tell me it isn't wrong, because it is. I belong to a feeling that must not exist, and yet I love you. I love you because you are charming, because you are irresistibly magnetic, because within you lies everything I've always searched for and never had. And I keep asking why. Why you? Why this way? But there are no answers. Only this love remains, suffocating and hollowing me out. Once, I believed love meant happiness. Now I understand it can also be a curse, for all it has brought me is sorrow and endless longing. I have given so much of myself to you, and you have returned so little, almost nothing. I hate myself for not knowing how to stop. I will never confess what I feel. I will never tell you how my breath caught when I first saw you. Nor will I ever admit how a sharp sting of jealousy cuts through me every time I see you beside another woman. I will never tell you how many times, in my mind, I've brushed your lips, or how many times I've wished your hands would find the shape of me. I will tell you none of that. If I speak at all, I will tell you that I despise you, that I regret ever being your friend, that you don't deserve even a moment of my time. And if you ever doubt it, know that my lies are flawless, because I have rehearsed them for months, until I almost managed to deceive myself. And yet, beneath all those layers, beneath every mask, the truth remains unchanged. I hate you because I love you. I love you because I hate you, and I can no longer separate the two. Sometimes I wonder if you will ever feel even a fragment of what I feel for you, but I know the answer before the question leaves my lips. You won't. You never will, because I will never tell you, because I am too weak to confess and too proud to beg. So I will remain silent, trapped in my own private war, in this eternal battle between love and hatred, where I lose both. I am alone, Mitchell, terribly alone, and perhaps I've grown used to it, but a part of me, the quietest and most fragile part, still wishes you were here beside me, to see me, to hear me, to love me the way I love you. That is why I write to you, though I know you will never read this. This paper will become my hiding place, my confession that no one will ever find. I will carry this secret with me to the end, because you must never know, never. And yet, I feel myself sinking, as if I'm drowning while still breathing. I've lost count of how many times I've realized I am broken, and I believe it was you who broke me, even if you never noticed how blind you were to what I carried inside. Everyone believes I hate you, and I try to believe it too, but the truth is, I have always loved you, deeply, fiercely, and I still do. I'm sorry for everything. Yours, if only on paper. Margaret Anya folded the letter quickly, overwhelmed by a wave of guilt so sharp it almost hurt. She felt as though she had intruded upon the very core of someone's soul, broken into a space where no one but those two had any right to exist. And yet, it was impossible to resist the pull of the past, those words that, even yellowed and aged by decades, still pulsed with life. If anything could be drawn from that letter, it was the realization that love had never been perfect, not long ago, not now, and never would be. Love was raw, contradictory, just as ready to build as it was to destroy. She flipped through the envelopes again, and her gaze lingered on the last one, the one marked by hand with the date 1945. It was her grandfather's letter. For a moment, curiosity and guilt clashed inside her, but she promised herself this would be the second and last letter she would read. Nothing more, because even this already felt like too much. She carefully unfolded the old paper and immediately noticed a dark coffee stain, spread like a small sun, frozen in time. The thought that this mark had rested there for nearly a century, and that it had been left by someone's careless hand while the war was still raging, felt almost unreal. This piece of paper had been read, held, folded and unfolded so many times that it bore the traces of those who had loved it and those who had waited. She ran her fingers over its rough texture and turned her eyes to the handwriting. Harsh, sharp, almost illegible in places, so different from her grandmother's delicate, orderly script. Dear Maggie, I have no clue where your story begins. Were you born in London, or did you come from another city, another corner of the world, for reasons I never asked about? Perhaps I should have asked, but I never needed to. Everything that truly mattered about you, I somehow already knew without a single question. My aim now is not to recount our lives separately, but to preserve the way our two stories touched, intertwined, and slowly became one. I grew up on Canvey Island, deliberately withdrawn from others, seeking peace in books and silence. My only friend was Barry, the boy who refused to give up on me, even when I turned my back on him, determined to live inside my own world. I never understood why he was so insistent on being part of my life, but somehow he managed, and our friendship, unexpectedly, was never heavy or awkward. The days passed in a quiet rhythm, uneventful, until the war changed everything. Professor George, who had been my mentor, vanished into other cities, and I was left alone, without the one person who knew how to give me strength. I said this wasn't meant to be a story about me, but I never truly told you mine. So let this be the first and the last time I do. I remember the moment everything shifted. Barry was dragging me through the tall grass, reckless and laughing, when Rowan stopped us, cold, stern, exactly as he always was. And then you appeared, stumbling, trying to hide your nervousness behind a layer of lipstick, while Rowan dragged along his suitcase full of stones just to impress you. My memories are blurred, for it was my first day of military training, and my heart was overwhelmed by everything happening around me. But I knew that even then, you were present in a way I didn't yet understand. I had drawn fake mustaches on my face with my mother's makeup, foolishly thinking it would set me apart from the others. Fate or coincidence, I don't know. But now, I believe it had to happen exactly that way. It was much later that I understood what your presence truly meant. The war devoured everything in its path. The battles were relentless. After the fight against the Nazis on the coast, I couldn't go on any longer. The weight of expectations, the years I carried on my shoulders, made me feel older than I was. I was only 18, and they expected me to stop a force I could barely comprehend. I remember falling to my knees, shattered, as the sun was setting behind me, when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I was certain it was Barry, ready to scold me and tell me to pull myself together. But it was you. Your voice, soft and gentle, didn't attack, nor did it judge. You didn't tell me to stop crying. You simply stayed. I remember our conversation too. You're scared, aren't you? You asked, walking beside me. I nodded, through tears. This whole dark machine, and I'm supposed to stop them. I'm only 18. Where's the army? Where's the help? I was angry, lost, and when I heard you whisper, I understand, I felt something inside me collapse. I shouted that you couldn't possibly understand, that no one ever could, and then I ran away. Now I know you wanted nothing more than to help, that you already loved me then, that you saw me for who I was, weak, and didn't look away. I didn't know how to accept that. Only much later, when the war was nearing its end, when my birthday passed quietly and no one remembered but you, only then did I understand. You came, and that day, you became my anchor. After it all, when the dust of war had settled, I realized how carefully you had remembered our moments, while I had overlooked them, too focused on battles and orders. Your attention was like a hand pulling me back to life. Bit by bit, I began to understand that something new had taken root in my heart. Quiet, steady, inevitable. It was love. And now, as I write to you, I know that our story carries more weight than all my battles, that it is worth more than any victory on the front. Because with you, I found what I had been searching for all my life. Peace. For the first time, I feel that I belong. You are the good that emerged from all the darkness, and every time I remember your smile and your voice, I know I have found my home. Today, as this ink sinks into the paper, I know that soon you will speak the word that will change our lives forever. Not I love you, though I know you will say it again and again, but the other one, the simple and greatest of all. You will say yes. And in exactly 2 weeks, God willing, you will become my wife. You, Margaret Colton. The woman I found, the woman who waited, will become mine. And I yours, forever yours, Mitch W. Anya wanted to scream with joy, but instead, silence filled her chest and turned into a heavy, yet sweet breath that caught in her throat. The letter she held in her hands radiated such warmth and love that seemed as though the paper itself trembled with the emotions poured into every word. In them, her grandfather spoke with the voice of a man, both brave and tender, and behind that voice stood an immeasurable strength, the strength of someone who, at just 18, had been pushed into military training and sent to foreign soil to fight against one of the darkest forces the world had ever known. It was impossible for Anya to imagine someone so young carrying such a burden on his shoulders. Yet, as she held the faded photograph in her lap and looked at her grandmother's smiling face, she could see in those features the same peace and kindness that had endured through time. In her grandmother's gaze, she saw how she had borne uncertainty and waiting, and Anya wished, sincerely and deeply, that she too could find within herself that same dignity and calm. She carefully placed the letter back into the thin, fragile envelope that had guarded its secret since 1945, and her fingers brushed along its edges, as though caressing the past itself. When she lifted her gaze, a scene appeared before her that was both tender and powerful at once. Fred was standing in the doorway, holding Kai in his arms, the child's small head resting securely against his shoulder. In that moment, Anya instinctively closed the box and lowered the lid, as if she had to protect the emotion she had just felt, and left it on the chair as she rose to meet them. Her hand gently stroked Kai's back, a soft, instinctive gesture that carried the comfort of a mother's touch. "What happened, Fred?" she asked. "She fell, but she's fine now," he replied shortly, biting his lower lip, his eyes fixed on Anya with something that looked like fear and disbelief all at once. "Fred?" Her voice wasn't just a question, but a plea, a demand that he explain what she couldn't read in his gaze. "I told her." "Told her what?" she whispered hoarsely, her eyes widening in shock. "You didn't... She hasn't let go of me since," he continued, his voice trembling, yet resolute, as though he had finally laid down a burden too heavy to bear. "I'm sorry, Anya. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't look into those beautiful blue eyes for another second without her knowing that I'm her father. I owed her that. She deserved to know." The words poured out of him like water from an overflowing glass, and though Anya wanted to stop him, she realized she didn't have the strength to interrupt the confession that had lived in him for so long. Only when her palm gently covered his mouth did the room fall into a thick, full silence. Fred found something in that touch he couldn't resist. He kissed her hand once, then again, and in that simple gesture, a smile broke through on Anya's face. "It's really quite rude to interrupt me while I'm interrupting you," she said through a soft laugh, her lips brushing the warm back of their daughter's head. "I'm so glad you told her. I was afraid to do it myself. I was terrified she'd lose her mind." Her hand slowly slipped from his lips, leaving behind an invisible trace that still burned between them. She looked at him deeply, unblinking, as if searching his eyes for the answers to all the years of silence. In them, she didn't find fear, only longing, a longing that didn't ask for permission, and a quiet confession that he had belonged to her all along. His lips found hers, carefully, almost shyly, as though he was afraid that one wrong move might make her disappear. The kiss was gentle, and between them rested the small body of their daughter, the being that had finally bound them together, the heart that had found its rhythm in their shared breath. It wasn't a kiss that sought an answer or reassurance. It was an acknowledgement of everything they had failed to say through the years, a comfort for lost time, and a promise that a new silence, a shared one, could become a home. In that moment, past and present, pain and solace, regret and hope all met and became one. Anya didn't pull away. Her eyes were closed, her whole body trembling with warmth that spread through her like a tide. Their daughter breathed peacefully between them, and their two souls, for a moment, spoke without words. In that still, quiet moment, Anya understood a truth that was neither bitter nor sweet. They had arrived too late, wounded and broken, but they had still arrived, together. Her arms wrapped around his waist, her heart pounding fiercely, and only then did she notice her knees weakening under the weight of the emotion flooding through her. Kai stirred in the safety of her father's embrace and let out a small gag, a tiny sound that drew laughter from their lips, a laughter born from the very heart of their kiss. Fred rested his forehead against Anya's, and time lost all meaning. They were suspended in a moment that had waited far too long to happen, and every breath, every emotion, and every touch became part of a single, precious wholeness. In his eyes, Anya saw excitement, but also relief. The kind of relief that comes when you finally speak a truth you've hidden for years. His arms held their little girl, but at the same time, they held her too, as if in that embrace he wished to bury all the lost days and the sorrows that had kept them apart. And Kai, nestled between them, looked as though she had finally found what she had been searching for her entire life. The warmth of her father's arms and the safety she had unconsciously longed for. Anya placed her palm on Fred's cheek, feeling beneath her fingers the fine lines that the years had carved there, small yet deeply telling, because they spoke of love, of waiting, and of endurance. "You know," she whispered, her voice thin but honest, "when you left, I didn't know if you'd ever come back. I didn't know whether to hate you, to love you, or to forget you. And then I had her, and I couldn't forget anything." Fred said nothing, his eyes filled with tears that did not fall, but shimmered there, ready to break free. He looked at her like a man afraid that words might shatter the fragile thing he had been given, and so he stayed silent, waiting for her to speak the truths she had carried within herself for years. "Every smile of hers was yours," Anya continued, her gaze dropping to Kai, who was breathing peacefully. "Every time she looked at me, from beneath her lashes, as if she knew something I didn't, she was yours. And I loved her even more for it, even though I didn't have you." Fred lowered his eyes to Kai, then looked back at Anya, as if searching her face for confirmation of everything he had said, and everything he still hadn't. His voice was quiet, but filled with a rare strength, the kind that comes only from the deepest honesty, from what has been buried too long. "I loved her too," he said, almost as a confession, "even when I refused to admit to myself that she existed somewhere in this world. Every night, I'd close my eyes and imagine her, what she looked like, what her voice sounded like, whether she knew I was out there, whether she knew I was her father. And it hurt, Anya. It hurt like someone was tearing away pieces of my soul, day after day, endlessly. But today it stopped hurting." His words weren't an accusation or a lament. They were the testimony of a man who, after a lifetime of wandering, had finally found his way back to his beginning, who had found what he thought was lost forever. Anya nodded, and there was nothing grand in that gesture. No drama, no pretense, only a quiet acceptance of a truth she had always known, even when she had buried it deep within herself, out of fear that it was too great to bear. A tear slipped down her cheek, and Fred, as if wanting to erase the pain that single tear carried, kissed it first, then her forehead, and finally her lips. The kiss was soft and lingering. It carried no urgency, no need to prove anything, only peaceful surrender and quiet gratitude, as if their touch reaffirmed a vow older than their choices and mistakes. "We're not perfect," she whispered, her voice trembling with both tears and laughter, "but now we're whole." There was no doubt or regret in her words, only a realization that had been waiting at the bottom of her being for the right moment to be spoken aloud, freed from every wall. Fred pressed his cheek against hers, wrapping his arms around both her and Kai, holding them with the careful strength of a man, afraid that loosening his grip might make them disappear, yet aware that nothing could be lost anymore, because everything was finally here. Kai, calm and nestled between them, breathed steadily, without a trace of unease, as though she too felt the circle closing around her, the circle that had been broken for far too long. Outside, the wind gently stirred the branches of the old pear tree in the yard, and through the window poured the golden light of late afternoon, the kind of light that can turn even the simplest moments into images that stay forever. Everything was still. Everything was exactly as it was meant to be, as if the world itself had paused to give them space to take their first shared breath. In that silence, in the simplicity of their embrace, something greater than any spoken vow occurred. Without a single word, without the need for explanation, the three of them became a family for the very first time. Fred brushed a lock of hair from Anya's forehead and looked at her, not just as the woman he loved, but as the sum of all the lost days, months, and years etched into her face, as if he wanted, in one single moment, to make up for everything he had never touched. "You know," he whispered cautiously, as though afraid to break the fragile quiet that wrapped around them like the softest blanket. This is the first time I felt peace. Real peace. Not that false kind, when you're alone and convince yourself you're happy simply because you don't know what else to be. His words lingered in the air, as a testament of a man who had spent his life defending himself through escape, and who now, for the first time, had stepped out of it. Anya smiled through her tears, and that smile held relief, sorrow, and love all at once. She didn't need to answer with words. Her body, leaning against his, spoke enough. Her breath, mingling with his, told him she was there, that he no longer had to fight alone. Kai slept between them, as if binding them with an invisible thread, reminding them that there was no longer you and me, but only us, and that this simple word carried the weight of an entire world. Sometimes I watched her while she slept, Anya said softly, her voice sounding like a confession that had waited too long to be spoken. And I'd wonder if one day she'd learn the truth, if she'd still look at me with the same eyes when she did. I was afraid it would break her, or me. But you? She paused, trembling, swallowing a tear as though her throat resisted letting it pass. You told her, and instead of breaking, she held on to you. Fred gently squeezed her shoulder, as a quiet answer that spoke louder than 1,000 words. Because she already knew, he said. Maybe she didn't have the word for it, maybe she didn't understand it, but a child's heart always knows where it belongs. His voice was soft, but within it was a certainty that left no room for doubt. Anya looked down at Kai, at her peaceful face, her slightly parted lips, her cheeks warmed by sleep. She's yours, Fred. She always was, even when you refused to believe it. Her words weren't an accusation, but a release, as though by speaking them, she had lifted a weight off her own shoulders and placed it where it had always belonged. Fred didn't answer with words. He simply closed his eyes and pressed his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling in a rhythm that felt like a quiet prayer. No more running, Anya, he said after a long moment, his voice steady, unshaken. No more silence between us. For her, for you, for us. Those 3 words weren't just sounds, but a promise, a vow heavy with the weight of everything still to come. Anya exhaled and kissed him on the cheek, then on the neck, slowly and softly, as if she wanted to memorize every detail of his closeness, every scent, every shade of skin beneath her lips. And everything that had once hurt, everything unspoken and hidden, melted away into one simple, priceless truth. They were together, finally, and that was enough.